feel like my beard looks extra red today. Or is it orange? I think it's the shirt. It really makes it pop. Hi, everyone. We're here today to talk about my biggest surprises of 2023. Ooh. Apologies, I had a bit of a clunky start. Let me just say, this video was inspired by the biggest surprises video done by Angela from the Literature Science Alliance. And essentially, the goal of this video is just to talk about the 10 books that I wish I could talk about that just don't make the cut for my best books at the end of the year. Normally, I do 10 fiction, 10 nonfiction. This year, I'm finally combining it, which made this list all the harder to figure out. Nevertheless, these are 10 books that really just made a lasting impression for whatever reason, whether I read them in the last month or read them at the beginning of the year. These are all books that I wish I could talk about that I think you should consider reading, or authors who I think you should be thinking about when moving into the next year, even if they're not my favorites of the year. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about my biggest surprises. I have ranked them as far as my overall opinion of them. First up is Beulah by Christy Nugel. This was the winner of the Bram Stoker Award for 2022 and a runner-up for Best Novel of the Shirley Jackson Award. In fact, it was that latter award was the reason I actually read this, because I was trying to do a video in time for Halloween where I would read all the Shirley Jackson nominees. I was trying to figure out whether or not they were all worth reading. I read I think 3/4 of that list. Never finished it. But part of my reward of trying to do that, at least, was reading some really new, under-the-radar authors. Christy Nugel is a great example of that. I ended up giving this book, I think, 3.5 stars. It's not a favorite book of the year, because I think it struggles in its storytelling. But what it does right is, I think, embody what I love about Shirley Jackson. This is a story of a young girl, a teenage girl, who can basically talk to ghosts. And there is a childlike wonder to that, explored slightly, but there is also just a dark reality of adulthood that is also right there beside it. And there are these threats that are hinted at throughout the book that aren't really explored until you get deeper into this world and you understand exactly what it is this girl is saying, what it means that she can talk to and see ghosts. What I loved most about this was the characterization of her family, the dynamic that was created, because it's not necessarily a healthy one, but it's one that just, it feels very realized, considering the position she's in, basically the things she can see and the impact that has on her relationships, on her life. It all feeds together so well to create such a wonderful and delightful atmosphere that I just absolutely adore it. I can't say it's the best of the year, but as a work of horror fiction, it does what I love. Where it struggles, I think, is that it feels like it sort of slogs towards the end, or in the middle, more like it. And I wish it was been a bit more refined for my taste. But it has the workings of what I think is just a phenomenal horror writer, and I think it's something that's worth checking out, if only just to see the type of writing and storytelling she's capable of, because this book is just phenomenal. I think this cover actually embodies the tone of this book really well, and even though it was just a 3.5 star, there was something about it that gets me so excited to think about it and think about reading her other books. This is a great start, I think. Let's keep going. Being Henry, a book that I had no intention of talking about, because honestly, I feel so impartial about Henry Winkler. I know he's a huge actor back in the day. He's a big character actor. That's how I know him, from things like Parks and Rec, or even on Adam Sandler movies when I was growing up. I don't have any memories of Happy Days, so if I did watch it, it wasn't very long. But I saw this face on NetGalley, the audio arc especially, and so I requested it, because I figured at the very least it's going to be fun and a good narration. Because when you have a comedian narrating the book, it's always going to be a fun ride, even if the book is unexceptional. And what I liked about this book was that I felt like it was actually pretty well constructed. I think the only reason this isn't a best of the year is because I don't have a personal connection with Henry Winkler. But if you do, honestly, this book is phenomenal. I don't think it's just something there just to sell. I think it's a really personal reflection on his personal life, and one that is conveyed in a very compelling manner. And honestly, I flew through this book. It was really fun read. There were parts where he would get to his personal life with his wife that are not just written by, but also narrated by her as well. That kind of narration is, of course, not nearly as on par as Henry Winkler as an actor and performer, but I think it complements the story overall. And even though this is low on the list, objectively, this is a really good book. I think it won the Good Resource Awards, which makes me second guess my choice. I just thought it was a really good memoir, and one that I think is certain to please those who are actually bigger fans of him than I am. Okay, next up, it's going to be a nonfiction memoir, biography. Shirley Chisholm, Champion of Black Feminist Politics. This was one that I've talked about several times on my channel this year, from the Ruth Sinelman review I did to my nonfiction recs of this year. And in short, I'll just say this is a comprehensive biography of Shirley Chisholm's life. One of the first black female congresswomen, and the first woman and black person, I believe, to be a candidate for a major party, if I remember correctly. But the details are all in the book. And the biggest thing I loved about this book was that it's a very broad overlook of her time in politics, basically just taking us on a journey through that time and helping us understand what she fought for, why, and why she made such a big impact in her day, despite oftentimes not being considered as a major player. And she really proved people wrong. And that is a story that's absolutely worth telling. Why this doesn't make best of the year is that as a book, I don't think it really breaks any molds. Next up, MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios. This book, another one that I talked about in my nonfiction recs. This is one that I think will be really good for Marvel Cinematic Universe fans. But as a book, honestly, this was kind of underwhelming. I didn't want to say it's disappointing on my disappointing list because I did really like it. But I'm a huge fan of Joanna Robinson, and the fact that I can't justify putting this on my favorites of the year, even if I had a nonfiction list, it just makes me feel like there's something it didn't deliver on. It's a compelling overarching narrative of the history of Marvel. Things become more tenuous as we get more modern. But that fundamental history is there, and it's fascinating to learn. It's, again, unexceptional, I feel like, in its overall writing and structure, but it gives us what it's selling. And what it's selling is something I was still very interested in. So it's a surprise, I don't know, but it's on this list because I want to talk about it. Next up after that is This Time for Me by Alexandra Billings. This one was hard not to reserve for my best of list because this felt like a solid 5 stars. It was beautiful, written, beautifully performed. Alexandra Billings is an amazing actress, performer, and trans activist, LGBT activist. And as I've talked about in several different places at this point, I just absolutely adore her. This book is just a very personal look at her life, and one that I can't help but want to promote. And if I can't justify it on my top 10 list, I feel like it deserves a right to be here. Recurring theme, sort of a runner-up list for best of the year. Next up is Notes of a Native Son by James Baldwin. This is a solid book that really gives a good introduction to all the ideas and themes that are explored in all of James Baldwin's works. It is a collection of essays that I feel like are really informative and educational, something that I feel like is worth and needs to be read. The reason this didn't make it to my end of the year list, best of list, is simply because it didn't really make the biggest impact. I think Baldwin has his biggest impact on me personally when I read it in the form of fiction. It's just that extra level of depth or empathy or connection I feel to the story and the characters that gives it an emotional weight on a level that doesn't quite always come, at least not as easily in nonfiction. That's why a lot of these last few books are actually all going to be fiction in this Biggest Surprises list. Despite it not resonating as strongly as his fictional works, there's no complaints I can really make about it. It's like 50 plus years old, and yet it is still amazingly prescient. You should read this book. You should read all of James Baldwin's books, but this is not a bad place to start. Okay, next up, our final 4 books, the biggest surprises of the year. This one honestly is a genuine surprise, and also one that I really wanted to like, and that is Words of Radiance, Book 2 of the Stormlight Archives. If you saw my end of the year TBR, this was on it. I think I already talked about how I was enjoying it there. I had to reread Book 1 this year, which is why I decided to read this one before the year was out, because I didn't want to let it sit too long before I forgot everything that I remembered. Basically, after rereading and relearning the first book. And that's because I wanted to get past that threshold where I could really understand what was going on, but also be invested in this world. This book is in my mind, kind of unexceptional. Like this series in general, like it's great world building, and I'm enjoying it. It's a solid read. In the same way that Stephen King can be a solid read, if at times unexceptional. But it certainly isn't what I consider the best of my list. It's just not. It's not for me on that level. But it's something that I'm happy to say I'm solidly engrossed in and really enjoying. And there's a good chance I might actually get through all these books next year. That's how much I'm really enjoying it. It's a great surprise, or satisfaction, really, more than anything, because I will push really hard to make myself like this, and I do, just because I knew the kind of joy I could get from it if I ended up liking it. I put in the extra effort that I might not have for other books that aren't as popular. We could discuss whether or not that's justified, but it is what it is. So let's move on to the next one. Oremshadow by Priya Sharma. Another book that I think could have easily been in my top 10 fiction if I had just done fiction list. This is a short novella that explores the life of a young boy in a family where the father is patriarchal, misogynistic, sexist or abusive towards his wife, and also towards his son. And basically he has to sell his farm, moving with his brother. And there is some really sad, dark adult things going on. I think this was a nominee originally for Shirley Jackson Award at some point back when it was first released. And the tone is absolutely there for being ominous, Shirley Jackson-y type world, in the sense that it's not as dark as, say, the first book in this list, but Beulah. What it has is, I think, that dark family tone, where you have this very kind of depressing family dynamic that, while depressing, is also very compelling and interesting to explore. And intermixed into the story is also this underlying story of this land being built on or around a dragon. I thought this would be a more overtly fantasy. What it is instead is more like using that fantastical story of a dragon as sort of an escape for this young boy trapped in this household. Whether or not it actually goes there in the end is something that you'll have to read to find out. But it is an idea that's explored more deeply. That is to say that fantastical dragon story is explored more deeply as we go along. If I had to say anything, I feel like this is Shirley Jackson meets Ursula K. Le Guin. I really did like this. I think if I had not read it so early in the year, it was like maybe March or sooner, it may have been on this list. Or if it had been an audiobook. I did listen to this. I used text-to-speech reader, which was perfectly fine. I just think I really wish it had a professional performer, because I think it could have added a level of connection that just you can't get with a text-to-speech reader. Still, a book that I honestly really loved, hence it being these top 3 books. These next 3 books are books that could easily fit in my best fiction books, my best books of the year. So just keep that in mind. They're not just something that made a lasting impression. They're books I honestly just really loved and think you might love too. Next up is going to be Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. This book, it was a travesty not to put it on my best of list. But I think part of the reason I couldn't was because I struggled to connect with it when I first started reading it. I read it back in January. I was still acclimating to moving to Australia. I was in a very bad headspace, and this book is a very dark book. It explores 3 characters, one being basically a TERF, the other one being a trans woman who used to date that TERF, and then someone else who I forget how she fits into that dynamic. And part of me wanted to reread it so I could really get a better appreciation for all the dense themes being explored in this book, which is really why it's on this list, is that I did enjoy it, and I could see all these wonderful ideas being explored in a style that is my favorite author, that is to say Shirley Jackson. She uses a very Jacksonian style in the writings of this work. Gothic, dark, demonic. It's just brilliantly executed. I can't put it on that list because I think very personal reasons just did not connect to it as strongly, or really feel like I took away everything that I should have or could have if I was in a better headspace. This is a book I will undoubtedly read again, almost certainly, but it's also one that, while I may not be prepared to say it's the best of the year quite yet, it is one that I can so easily recommend. And if you haven't read this or heard of it, please at least look into it. It's a phenomenal horror book if you like dark, demonic, gothic horror, Jacksonian horror. This is right there. And it is like my favorite books of last year and this year. When it comes to horror, it uses this horror not just gratuitously, but for a purpose, to explore real-world themes and that can be very dark on their own, and just giving it a horrific lens, a horror lens, by which to sort of change how we view it. With that said, we're getting here to the infinite miles. by Hannah Margaret Ferguson. A review that I did got so few views. I think even now it's like maybe 60 views. And I kind of understand it. People don't click on a review that you never heard about. And I heard nobody talk about this book. It's not from major press. It's not like Tor or anything like that. It's essentially like a new take on Doctor Who. It's not a Doctor Who story. But it's a story that looks at these two girls, these two young women who were friends, one of which goes missing and eventually is assumed to be dead. And the other one is trying to reckon with that loss, and that the moments or either the months and years leading up to that where her friend became distant and trying to reckon what's going on until she gets pulled into this world where she realizes that her best friend, and possibly more, was immersed in this fantastical situation where she's been traveling through space and time with this figure from their favorite TV show, The Infinite Odyssey. And to be clear, Infinite Odyssey is just a take on Doctor Who. What I loved about this was that it took that, it created a Doctor Who-esque world for a more mature audience, I think, while also giving us other things that we love in time travel pop culture, where instead of a TARDIS, the TARDIS is actually in the shape of a muscle car, like Back to the Future, and the Traveler, even though every time I read it, I thought, or I heard the voice of David Tennant, he's actually presented as a sort of a pop icon, a rock icon from the 80s, aka we're talking David Bowie. So like David Bowie meets Back to the Future meets Doctor Who. And I think the story was just brilliant. I thought it was a lot of fun. It has some shortcomings that I better realized when I did a reread of it, because I read it twice. This was one of the first books I read, novels that I've read fully with my eyes in years, because usually it's text-to-speech or audiobook. And I was on vacation at a beach, just reading with my eyes, and that was just a brand new experience. Part of the reason why I absolutely adored it, part of the reason why it's so hard to put on my best love list of the year. Oh my god, I get so excited about it because I love Doctor Who, especially with this new specials going on and Tutu Goth coming as the Doctor. These are all things I love, and this whole atmosphere on Doctor Who right now is having a new thing, which I absolutely love to see. And this book was just part of that. This came out earlier this year, closer to June. I adored it. I thought it was a very heartfelt story. If anything, it feels a little too fast-paced. So it's not a slow book. It's a fun book. I don't think I realized how fast-paced it was until I reread it. Because when I reread it, I listened to the audiobook, and it was clearer to me that the moments I remember so vividly just fly by so quick, and I would have liked to have existed a bit more in each of these moments. Still, a very compelling book. One that I think is very true to the lore, that is to say not the lore, but the feel and the tone that is Doctor Who. It was just wonderful. It was a really delightful take on that sort of unique genre in a way that just really pulls on your heartstrings with all these different IPs that it's referencing. So if you haven't heard about this, please, come on. Don't make me regret not putting this on my best of list for the year, because this book deserves more attention. If you love Doctor Who, you should give it a shot. Please. Okay, that's it. This is my top 10 biggest surprises of 2023. If you made it to the end, thank you. Honestly, I wanted to do it the opposite direction, best to worst, but I resisted the urge, decided to keep it traditional. And as always, I appreciate you watching. I hope you have a great time, a great day rather, and a great holiday, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.